After so many struggles and triumphs and moments that have tested my husband in ways I never could have imagined, I have seen firsthand that being president doesn't change who you are. No, it reveals who you are.
I'm Marcus Mabry, live here in Charlotte as the second day of the Democratic National Convention gets underway. It was a big first night with Michelle Obama's speech firing up the crowd in this hall and even getting kudos from Republicans. We'll get back to that in a moment, but first we have some news today. The convention was scheduled to move to the open-air Bank of America Stadium tomorrow, but looming thunderstorms have scuttled that plan. White House correspondent Jackie Calms joins me now to talk more about what it means. Jackie, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
What does it mean? This is going to be 60,000 people Thursday night, the culmination of this convention. Barack Obama giving, what had to be the speech of his life.
Right.
What does it mean to the Democrats that they won't get that opportunity?
Well, it's a big disappointment to them because this was going to be the peak of the convention, and it would raise memories of 4 years ago when he did a similar, his acceptance speech was before 74,000 people in Denver, and it really, it's something that has rarely been done, and it certainly wasn't done by Mitt Romney at his convention. But you do have the weather things. It raises questions as to whether they could have mustered that many people, but I think they could have in good weather. It was a challenge, but now the challenge is, what are they going to do with all those disappointed people? And
you would not want to be the guy who has to find balloons to put in here in this arena for tomorrow night.
That could be the least of their worries at this point. I mean, it's just, I think this will look good on TV, though, because this is a sort of intimate arena, and we saw last night in the reception to Michelle Obama that it really, this crowd is really energized.
Speaking of intimacy and speaking of Michelle Obama last night, we talked a lot about what she would have to do versus what Ann Romney had to do last week in Tampa. Ann Romney was introducing her husband, or reintroducing her husband to the American people. We thought, oh, Michelle Obama can't do that. He's been president for 4 years.
Right.
Yet she seemed to reintroduce her husband to the American people. It was an amazing speech. Even Republicans giving it positive marks today. Were you surprised by anything in there?
Not really. The one thing I was surprised at is that there was I thought maybe at the end there'd be a video come on, and that her husband from the White House and the daughters would be, in a video link that would show they were watching the speech she gave. Ultimately, they released one still photo, which sort of, to me, captured just how private that this couple has tried to keep their family life through the 4 years of his presidency.
Well, Jackie, let's take a look now at one clip from last night from that Michelle Obama speech.
And I love that even in the toughest moments, when we're all sweating it, when we're worried that the bill won't pass and it seems like all is lost. See, Barack never lets himself get distracted by the chatter and the noise. No, just like his grandmother, he just keeps getting up and moving forward with patience and wisdom and courage and grace. And he reminds me that we are playing a long game here, and that change is hard. And change is slow, and it never happens all at once, but eventually we get there.
So change is slow, doesn't happen all at once, but eventually we get there.
Right.
Who was she talking to when she said that line?
Well, I think she was talking to a lot of people, especially the base. There were two things I heard in that quote. One is she was addressing her husband's famous cool, that, there's a lot of people on the left especially that would like to see him get a little more passionate once in a while. And the other thing is the people that are, frustrated that maybe some of the big changes they had hoped for haven't occurred yet. And in this, she said, Barack Obama, my husband, is not getting rattled about this. He knows he's taking the long view, and that change comes, and it often comes slowly. And this has been a standard refrain of his, but it's one that, in this arena, arena and then speaking to the millions in the audience, that they could get out more widely than they ever had before.
Do they need to get it to independent voters, even to disaffected Republicans who may have voted for him last time? That we couldn't do it all in 3.5 years?
I think you're exactly right, because we have seen anecdotally and in some of the focus groups that some of these independents who voted for Barack Obama the first time, they're more than anyone feel like, well, he promised change and it hasn't happened. I think most of the change those people want, though, is change that would have Washington working together, Republicans and Democrats, and that hasn't happened, and it's hard to see anything Barack Obama could do at this point to make it happen.
Speaking of Republicans, there was we also asked before the speeches last night, how could the Democrats give this 1-2 punch? On the one hand being positive, and the other hand hitting Mitt Romney. Let's take a look at a clip of one speaker, Julian Castro, young mayor of San Antonio, talking a little bit about Mitt Romney.
Mitt Romney, quite simply, doesn't get it. A few months ago, shouldn't determine whether you can pursue your dreams. Not in America, not here, not in the 21st century. I don't think Governor Romney meant any harm. I think he's a good guy. He just has no idea how good he's had it.
Julian Castro, mayor of San Antonio, young, Hispanic, 37 years old. Right. We had talked about all the future stars, potentially Republican candidates for 2016 that we saw at their convention. There were some stars last night here, and they were younger.
Right. Well, and this is big to the whole message of this convention, that the keynote speaker is a young Hispanic politician. They really need the Latino vote, and there's all the polls show that the Latino vote is a little more depressed this year. While it's a huge gap in support, with most Latinos supporting President Obama, the enthusiasm is down, and getting those people out to vote is the challenge. So now they've brought out this very telegenic mayor of San Antonio who gave a good speech. Now, when Barack Obama gave the keynote speech in 2008, there were a lot of people who said,
Back in 2004.
Or 2004, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Yeah, by 4 years later, he was the nominee. People said that's going to be our first black president, but I don't think anybody in the hall thought that he would be the nominee just 4 years later. In the case of Julian Castro, people were saying, they're looking at him and thinking, this is our first Latino president.
He had an interesting retort to that. He said, I'm from Texas, I'm a Democrat. It's going to be a tough row to hoe.
But then again, in the long range, with the demographic changes in this country, Democrats have their eyes on Texas. But you're right, there's no one who really thinks Texas is going to be in the Democrats' camp in 2016. His message, not only was he, as a Latino man, a good messenger, as the Democrats see it, for the votes they want to get, this message of you can rely on your family for opportunity if you can, but in a lot of cases people can't. And just like he and his twin brother, they needed help from government loans. And this line of Mitt Romney's that he used in Ohio about, if you need to start a business, get college money, go ask your parents for it. This is one that President Obama's been using in his stump speech routinely now, and as Julian Castro using it shows, they think, aside from Latino votes, they also need young votes, and that's a really resonant line with young voters and people who want to go to college, who are in college now, or who just have left college and have a lot of debt.
I wonder, how do you see it working out, this kind of, the Democrats' message last night really strongly directed to the middle class, saying, we don't just understand you, we are you.
Right.
Versus the Republican message of, we're Americans, we all aspire to do better, we all aspire to be rich, and we're Americans, we all think we can be rich. Yeah. Which one do you think will find greater resonance with the American people? Because we have both strains, I think.
Well, the American people are polarized, so I think you're going to find about 49.5 are drawn to either party's message, and it's that little bit of sliver that they're aiming for. But I think it's really interesting, this convention, there was a lot of talk at the Republican convention about business and government getting out of the way, and it was about giving business the freedom to just to do and to thrive. At this convention, just judging by the first night, but it's a pretty good judge, I think, or a pretty good gauge. It's about, it gives, makes me think of the line in Barack Obama's stump speech where he says, instead of having top-down economic growth, we want middle-out. So while the Republican convention, you hear a lot about businesses. At this convention, you're hearing a lot about workers, which stands to reason. I mean, it goes to the traditional image of both parties. But it's really interesting about giving people both the opportunity both to get good jobs or even to form their own little companies and create jobs.
Jackie, stay right where you are. We'll be coming right back to you. But before we do, I'm going to go down now to Rick Burke, who's standing by in the media center with Jody Cantor. Take it away, Rick.
Marcus, thanks a lot. Now, Jody, you've become a student of the president's competitiveness. Can you tell us about that?
President Obama plays to win. He is a deliberative professor. He is a mellow guy from Hawaii, but he also has this will to win, this competitive streak, this propensity to grade people that I've been seeing for years, but we really saw it come into overdrive as we get closer to Election Day. Take a look at this video. I'm Jody Cantor for the New York Times. In this election season, President Barack Obama wants you to know that he's the best candidate, and not just the best at foreign affairs or economic issues.
I'm a surprisingly good pool player, so if you ever see me in a pool hall, don't just think that you can...
Don't walk up and throw down money is what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying. I might end up cleaning your clock.
Aides and friends say comments like that are actually a key to who Barack Obama really is. Not a man who inherited wealth or fame or power, but a man who worked to be the best, to compete and win, to compete and win. He talks about being the best all the time, from education speeches to more casual conversations.
So you see how LeBron may be the best player, but he lost because Boston was a better team.
When he reads a book to school children, he doesn't just flip it open and start. He starts by announcing just how well he will read it.
And I'm going to try to do the best rendition ever of Green Eggs and Ham.
He pours effort into perfecting even small tasks. He pronounces foreign names and places with precision. Advisors say that's because he walks around the White House muttering the words to himself for hours before he has to pronounce them publicly.
Brasileiro. Is that good? Okay, I'm not going to make a fool of myself.
After he embarrassed himself with a low bowling score in the 2008 campaign, he quietly practiced in the White House basement alley until his score improved. The perfectionism doesn't always play well politically, and this time around he's selling himself as much more of a regular guy. But his desire to win the A+ has a way of coming through. Part of what's difficult about this race for him is that he's the ultimate high achiever, but the country hasn't given him such great grades this time around. With weeks to go until Election Day, the polls are basically tied, and it's almost as if the president can't stop telling people how good he really is. So as you watch Barack Obama making his case, don't be surprised if he pays himself a few more compliments.
I got a few other things on my mind. I would say so. But I'm not going to just be humiliated on national television. You're holding up well. Oh.
Now, Jody, I'm of two minds of that when I see that video. On the one hand, don't we want our president to be a striver, to be the best he can be? On the other hand, I see some arrogance sort of verging on some arrogance there. What should we make of this?
I think that's exactly right. This is a really positive quality that Barack Obama has slightly in excess. Of course, we want a president who works hard, who tries to master everything, who pours tons of effort into even the smaller tasks of the presidency. But it creates two problems for him. One is political. You know, he has been so derisive towards Mitt Romney in the last couple of days. He said a few days ago that watching the Republican convention was like watching a 1950s black and white TV. In the 2008 debate, he said, "You're likable enough, Hillary." Being disparaging like that, giving opponents grades, it doesn't really comport with the kind of above the all nature of the presidency. And then the other problem is that he sometimes does overestimate what he can achieve. He came into office saying he was going to change the nature of Washington. He was going to solve Israeli-Palestinian peace. And so the question is, does he really believe he can do these things, which those are not realistic estimations?
So if I believe what you're saying, which I do, tomorrow night, his big speech, he's there thinking, I I obviously have to do better than Mitt Romney. I have to do better than I did 4 years ago. I mean, how will he grade himself, and what will he consider a success?
For the speech?
For the speech.
You know, I've really wondered about that. I talked to David Axelrod about the president writing a speech, and he said that the president is most personally focused on the kind of rhetorical challenge of making a case for a second term. And we know that that's actually, it's not an easy case to make because he's talking about unfinished business. He has to say that he can get things done, but he has to be realistic about the fact that the House is under Republican control. So he has to find a way of inspiring people while also making a case that sounds plausible.
I guess what I'm asking is, how hard is he on himself?
Really hard.
Like, if he doesn't really hit it out of the park tomorrow, will he know it and say it and admit it and feel bad about it?
Absolutely. Aides from the 2008 race said he could be very self-flagellating. If an appearance didn't go well, he would say, if only I'd practiced more, if I'd only put in more time, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we know that this is a president who likes to perform in key moments. So just as, you know, as somebody who's watched Michelle Obama for years, I knew she was going to be very effective last night because this is just a woman who executes. That's her nature. The president's challenge is much, much greater with his speech, but I would be really surprised if he didn't put his best effort into it.
And he's now still pouring over it, as far as you know, and revising and changing and practicing.
There are always last-minute changes, especially with the Barack Obama speech. A lot of his best speeches have been written at 2 o'clock in the morning, the day before he was supposed to deliver them.
And there's a sense that he's the one to edit it better than some of his aides.
Absolutely.
And he even tells them sometimes, I could do your job better than you could.
Absolutely. And even on little things, he'll go through a speech and he'll say, this is in passive voice, and he'll correct it. He'll do lots of takes on a video he doesn't think is perfect. He is a true perfectionist.
Well, we'll see what he does tomorrow night. A, B, C, D, E, or F. We'll see what the grade is. Thanks a lot, Jody. Really appreciate it. That's all for me now, Marcus. Back to you.
Thanks, Rick. Up next, we've got a different way to look at the speeches from last night. Earlier, Assistant Managing Editor Jim Roberts caught up with Adam Sharp, Twitter's man in Washington, who has an interesting way to look at Twitter traffic from last night. Let's take a look.
Hi, I'm Jim Roberts of the New York Times. I'm with Adam Sharp. He's the head of news and politics for Twitter. Adam's going to walk us through some of the findings that Twitter has developed, both at the RNC and in the first day of the DNC. A lot of interesting information. But first, you probably should explain to everybody, just so they understand, what your Twindex, right? That's what you're calling it. What Twindex actually is, what it attempts to measure, and how you're using it.
The Twitter Political Index is a daily measurement of Twitter user attitudes towards the candidates as expressed in their own tweets. We, our social analytics partner Topsy, and our polling partners are actually studying all these tweets that mention either candidate and determining whether they are positive or negative in tone. So, for example, we run these numbers every night at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. So these are the numbers from last night, just prior to the primetime lineup of speeches that included Michelle Obama. So President Obama had a 25. That was a 1-point increase over where he was the night before. Mitt Romney actually stayed consistent with where he was the night before at 14. The idea is, if you were to take all the tweets on Twitter, 400 million tweets a day, and line them up from the most negative to the most positive, where would the average tweet about the president or Governor Romney fall?
Okay.
So what this tells us is that, at least at 8 o'clock yesterday, all the tweets that had been sent mentioning the candidates over the preceding 24 hours were largely negative in reference to each of the candidates.
Have they ever achieved that 50% ranking?
In fact, they have.
Okay.
And if we look at just this 3 or 4 month period, going back to the beginning of May, we've actually seen several spikes for each of the candidates. Now, on this chart, obviously Obama in blue, Romney in red. Romney has led about 42–43% of the time. The president, a little over half the time. If you average it all out, it results in about a +3 lead for the president.
Which isn't that far off from many of the basic opinion polls that we see, right?
No, it's not. But looking here, going back to May 1st, some spikes for the president. We saw one on May 9th following his announcement of support for gay marriage. We saw a spike following the health care ruling out of the Supreme Court.
So each of these spikes, I don't know if people can see this, but each of these spikes are topping the 50% mark.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then for Romney, you saw a peak following the president's comments that the private sector is doing just fine. You saw a peak in early August when he announced Paul Ryan as his running mate, and you saw a peak over the course of the Republican convention last week in Tampa.
Let's move into the RNC. Any big overarching thoughts that you had from the week in Tampa?
Well, for both these conventions, the big headline is increased activity and engagement. The 2008 election cycle, when you take the Democratic convention, the Republican convention, the announcement of Sarah Palin that weekend in between, put it all together, it's 360,000 tweets.
Okay.
Republican convention alone this year, 5 million. Democratic has already crossed the 3 million mark. So we're seeing handily orders of 10, 20 times increase in volume over 2008.
So we've had one night of the DNC. Any conclusions that you can draw off of the speakers last night of Castro and Michelle Obama?
Well, one thing that we did is we actually measured the tweets per minute over the course of the night. So these are not measuring positive or negative the way we do in the Twindex.
This is just a raw number.
Raw conversation about the convention and its speakers. And this is capturing those moments. Because we're going in these minute slices, these are the moments that a cycle ago would have been someone sitting on the couch next to you saying, Jim, did you see this?
Yeah.
But now we can actually measure it at a national scale. What was interesting was for the earliest hours of the session, we saw volume very consistent with what we saw in Tampa, just a few hundred into the low thousands of tweets per minute. And it slowly built up. But as we got to the 10 o'clock hour, we then saw a big shift. So here, the yellow line is last night here in Charlotte. The red line is, for comparison, the same night last week in Tampa, the night that Ann Romney and Chris Christie were the big speakers. So there was one moment early in the evening, in the 9 o'clock hour, where there was slightly more volume at the Republican convention than the same moment at the Democratic convention.
And you're going to tell me why.
That was Rick Santorum's speech. He went on a run talking about hands that built America. But then from that point forward, you saw a rapid acceleration on the Democratic side. Peaks here for Ted Strickland's speech, for Governor Deval Patrick's speech from Massachusetts, for Libby Ledbetter talking about women's rights. But the star of the evening when it comes to just sheer tweet volume was the First Lady. She topped out at almost 28,000 tweets per minute. Now, to put that in context, the biggest political speech of the year is the State of the Union address. This year's State of the Union, her husband at his peak, 14,000 tweets per minute.
All right, well, let me throw one thing at you. A person I follow, he's a colleague of mine, you may follow him too, Patrick LaForge, at one point last night, tweets, liberals swooning, conservatives snarking, reversed of last week. But it suggested to me, that he's hearing, basically such a consistency of use patterns of Twitter. Basically, if you're a liberal in this case, you're high-fiving your friends, you're sitting on your couch, right, cheering Michelle on. If you're on the Republican side, you're sitting grousing, making snarky comments. Is that what Twitter is? Or would you see more of a higher level of discourse?
Well, I think it's measuring reaction. Conventions are a sequence of moments, and they provoke these reactions, both positive and negative, snarky and so on. And these are conversations that Twitter did not invent. These conversations have always been part of the dialogue. Just a cycle ago, they were limited to the coffee shop, the water cooler, the dinner table.
Or your sofa, right?
Or the sofa, and the world couldn't hear them. Now we're actually able to measure and participate in these conversations at a global scale.
Okay. BuzzFeed's Ben Smith has taken a seat in the media center now, and he's standing by with a social media voice making some waves on Twitter. Take it away, Ben.
Thank you, Marcus. I'm here with Stephanie Newell, who's one of a number of folks we've been talking to who basically fought their way into the political conversation with no paper, no obvious qualifications other than their kind of wit and intelligence on Twitter. Thanks for joining us, Stephanie.
No, thank you for having me.
She tweets under the handle at emo kids love me. Because the emo kids, apparently they love her.
They do.
And she's a graduate of Florida Pacific Law School.
Florida Coastal
Law School, and a former head of the Young Democrats at Wesleyan College. And but kind of best known to me, at least, for engaging pretty aggressively but respectfully with reporters. I think I first noticed you, as many of us, fighting with Jake Tapper. And I wonder kind of what prompted you to just kind of speak out like that.
Well, I absolutely disagreed with one of his blogs, and I I felt like I should say something about it.
What was the topic?
Mitch McConnell. It was a quote from Mitch McConnell, and the rest of the article was just assuming that this was truth, and I had a problem with that. So, because I feel like the media speaks for me, and I need them to speak for me in a way that is, fair and it's not like Fox News, fair and balanced, but fair. So I told him I didn't agree with him, and we kind of went at it for a little while. But then he explained his side, and I explained why I disagreed, and we kind of came to a happy medium.
And did he wind up changing the post?
A little bit.
Did that surprise you?
It did. It did. It was amazing. I thought, wow, these people really want to see their work expressed properly, and if you have a valid point, they'll listen to you and they'll take it into consideration.
Yeah, that's sort of what I like about fighting with you on Twitter versus fighting with other people on Twitter is that you you actually, I don't know, I think you have a pretty uncynical take on what we do. Yeah. And I wonder, do you think? Do you see yourself as being out there as sort of a liberal partisan, which you are? I think personally, you were here to attend the convention, but right. or do you see yourself as different from other folks out there who are just like kind of going after the press nonstop?
Well, I think I'm part of the reasonable caucus, honestly. Like
it's a small caucus on Twitter.
It's very small because everybody has their side, and they believe their side is absolutely right, and nothing can change their mind whatsoever. So it's really just people yelling at each other sometimes, but I don't think that's useful, and it doesn't really move the conversation forward, and that's my objective, to move the conversation forward. Like, I don't agree with this, and this is why, and here's all of my research and evidence as to why, and I think that's fair.
Yeah, no, it's an attitude we appreciate. You were telling me about April Ryan, the White House radio reporter, the other day. You had a run-in with her.
Well, yeah. She asked a question that she said, she asked Robert Gibbs, this was a while ago.
Yeah.
She said, does the president support black farmers? That's a yes or no question, first of all. And why would you ask a yes or no question? You're not going to really get an answer. And then it just kind of snowballed. And so I wrote a blog about it to complain. I was like, here's the question you should have asked. And then I find out my blog was linked because all of a sudden I started getting all these page views. I was like, what's happening here? And it turned out that it was linked on Political Punch, the ABC political blog. Mm-hmm. And then I heard from April Ryan. So
did she wind up correcting or? No, she wasn't.
No,
you didn't reach there was no truce was reached.
No, she was not into that at all. I was like, you don't follow me. How did you know I wrote this? And she said, oh, people tell me. So I backed off.
Do you find it intimidating to have these kind of national figures, pushing back on you?
No, because I have a law degree. And
it's a funny thing I was saying before, all of these smart people on Twitter are bored people with law degrees. This is like 3/4 of the, I don't know, you may well be not bored at all, but there's a lot of intelligent people with law degrees who, I guess, because if you're a lawyer, you don't want to be out there too much under your own name, mixing it up. There's a lot of sort of very smart pseudonymous lawyers out there on Twitter.
Well, there's also the issue, I am not barred in the state of Georgia, and I have to constantly worry that somebody's going to ask me for legal advice, and I have to say I cannot give you legal advice because I am not an attorney. Yeah, you can't give legal advice on Twitter, but further, I can't give you legal advice, period, because I can't put myself out.
No legal advice then?
No.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me.
Marcus, back over to you.
Thanks so much, Ben. I'm joined again by Jackie Combs for one more time before we sign off for this afternoon. Jackie, last night, a well-choreographed night for the Democrats. Solid messaging, as they say in politics. One hiccup, this issue of what's in the platform, and the Republicans got a lot of heat for this last week. The Democrats, not much, but one issue, Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. For some reason, that was taken out of the platform. Right. It wasn't it before. Why would the Democrats want, this doesn't make a difference for American foreign policy, why would Democrats change their platform in that regard. It's not going to make them any friends politically in hard swing states like Florida.
Well, administration officials say there's no real change here. It's the difference between in 2008 he wasn't a president, now he's an incumbent president hoping to make peace between the parties in the Middle East. But, you know, they're sort of being hung on their own petard here, having put the language in one time. Why do you take it out on such a sensitive subject as Jerusalem as the capital? Obviously, the Israeli side insists that Jerusalem is the once and future capital of the country, and the Palestinians do not recognize it. But all sides have agreed to date that it will be a matter for the final negotiations of a peace treaty. But those sort of nuances get lost in a political arena, and so, you know, it's not I don't think in the end it's a big deal, but what makes it a bigger deal than it perhaps is the fact that, you know, the president is a suspect, his support for Israel is suspect among some really pro-Israel American Jews, and the Republicans are doing everything they can to stoke that suspicion.
Of course. Well, speaking of choreography, and last night being well choreographed, and possible wild cards tonight, everyone's made a lot out of Bill Clinton speaking tonight. Who else is speaking tonight, and what will you be looking for? Well,
Bill Clinton's obviously the big draw, and in the prime time, 10 o'clock hour. But they have a little bit of somebody for everybody tonight. They've got Bob King, the head of the United Auto Workers, and the founder of Costco, who will talk about the auto rescue. They have Senator wannabe Elizabeth Warren, who wants to unseat Scott Brown, the moderate Republican from Massachusetts. She is a favorite of the base here, the liberal base. So she hasn't always been a favorite of the Obama administration in the time that she was a consumer advocate, but she is a favorite of the base. They will also have Sandra Fluke, who's become a celebrity now since her little dust-up with Rush Limbaugh over women's coverage and insurance policies of contraceptives. And they will have an activist a young Latina, who's one of the strivers, high achievers, who is pushing for the DREAM Act. It's very big with Latino voters, that would let people who were brought to this country illegally as children, but now want to go to college, serve in the military, to stay here legally. So they'll be punching all the buttons tonight.
It impressed me last night, the number of Latinos, in addition to Mayor Castro, and the strength of them in the lineup.
Right.
We're going to see a lot more Latinos again tonight.
Right, and we'll see Mayor Vergasso of Los Angeles, who's the chairman of this event, so we see him repeatedly. So you're right.
One question. Michelle Obama is a real unifier, the most popular person associated with this White House last night. Is there any danger tonight with these kind of red meat liberals like Elizabeth Warren? You might alienate some of the centrists and independents you might have appealed to last night.
Well, there is that risk, but I think that what everyone's looking for, what everyone will probably remember, is Bill Clinton. Of course, as we saw with Clint Eastwood in the Republican convention, you don't always know what the person's going to say or how they'll be remembered. That Clint Eastwood was supposed to be a big get. But I think with Bill Clinton, you know, people like to think, oh, you know, he and President Obama haven't had the best of history. But they're on the same page. And I'll say this about Bill Clinton, he's not only fondly remembered here, but independents remember his administration as in a very positive light. But just as Democrats say the Republicans are looking backward, Bill Clinton represents that Democrats look backward, too, when it comes to Bill Clinton.
Absolutely. All right, we'll be watching. That's all for me for now. My opinion colleagues will be taking over. Op-ed columnist Charles Blow is standing by. We'll see you back here at 7 p.m. In the meantime, thanks for watching the New York Times.
Hi, everyone. I'm joined here now by my fellow columnist, Ross Douthat. So, Ross, we're one day in. Are you converted already?
I'm converted. I've been persuaded of the wonders of abortion, the horrors of outsourcing.
Why do you always go to abortion? This is your first,
why do I always go to abortion? Did you watch the first 2 hours? I'm very predictable.
Right after you collect your $200, you go straight to abortion.
No, I know. I think that was actually something that Touré said on MSNBC.
Oh my God.
No, so I thought last night's convention was a very interesting experiment by the Democrats. I thought that they worked harder than the Republicans did to bifurcate into two sort of separate presentations. The first presentation ran before 10 p.m., before the networks went live.
What is that one?
That is the pitch to the party faithful. It was a much more explicit pitch to the party base.
Now, what I saw was like, accomplishment after accomplishment, what they would describe as accomplishment after accomplishment.
It was a mix of two things,
okay,
right? It was a mix of, yes, a more robust defense of the Obama record than I think a lot of people were expecting, joined to very strong, strident attacks on Mitt Romney, whether it was Deval Patrick talking about his record in Massachusetts or Ted Strickland saying that if he were Santa Claus, he'd, fire the reindeer and outsource the elves. Fact checkers rate that mostly true, but nonetheless. And then there was a heavy focus on the war on women idea, sort of reproductive rights and so on.
So how do you think that works?
But then I think the question, right, so then 10 p.m. rolls around and suddenly it's Martin O'Malley, who wasn't very good, but then the mayor of San Antonio and Michelle Obama, who gave, I thought, an absolutely wonderful speech that was plainly pitched to much more to swing voters, to independents, and so on. And I think the interesting question is, does this kind of move work, right? Is it possible to sort of have two different messages in one night and in one
really
convention?
Different. I mean, they're just different tonally, right? They're not contradictory.
They're different tonally and substantively, right? There's a very big difference between having Michelle Obama on stage sort of talking about what she and the president have in common with the middle class and how they understand American struggles and so on, and having the head of, an abortion rights lobbying group delivering a very, we'll call it, strongly worded defense of abortion rights. Those are two very different modes of persuasion. It's the difference between
middle class from. I mean,
it's a difference between a speech by, let's say, you were watching the Republican convention, and at 8:30 p.m. Grover Norquist came on and gave a sort of long attack on tax increases. It's the difference between that and, say, the speech Mitt Romney gave, which was much more sort of couched in generalities.
I thought the entire Republican convention was summoning Grover Norquist.
I mean, how many times, for instance, how many times did Mitt Romney talk about the virtues of massive tax cuts, for instance, in his convention speech? Not that many times.
I couldn't find any facts. I mean, specifics. No, I'm not going to say facts.
Right,
specifics.
But I wouldn't say, Michelle Obama's speech last night wasn't wildly specific either. That's sort of
but the
prime
First Lady's
time
speech is a different animal, right?
No,
So
I agree.
It's a different, and in fact, I mean, just in contrast, what I think that Ann Romney could have done better that Michelle Obama actually did do was to say, this is how he works on things.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that.
I thought Michelle Obama's.
If Ann Romney had said, Mitt won't fail because I have seen him at work doing this in these phases in his life, it would have been much more effective.
No, I absolutely agree. And I have to say, I thought Ann Romney's speech, while very good, was somewhat overrated at the time. And I think Michelle Obama's speech is proof that it was in fact overrated, because Michelle Obama, she raised the bar. Now, in fairness, she has had 4 years as First Lady and so on, and
I see some softness. I mean, I see like there may be like closer to the middle.
You mean
a little leftiness?
I tore up all of my vicious anti-Michelle Obama columns that I had planned for the remainder of the week. No, it was. Look, you don't have to be in the middle to recognize a good speech, and that was a very good speech.
So moving forward, you think. You're not sure, right? You don't know how this works or how this plays. So what are you expecting tonight from?
Well, tonight we're getting, again, hypothetically, we're getting Bill Clinton delivering a kind of version of the traditional vice presidential speech, right? Normally the vice presidential nominee speaks. Tonight they've given the slot to Bill Clinton instead, and the assumption is that he will essentially do to Mitt Romney what Paul Ryan tried to do to Barack Obama. So this will be, but he'll do it in his Bill Clinton way, right? It will be folksy and charming and sort of gently sticking in the shiv and so on. And then that will free up the president to be more positive and optimistic and forward-looking on Thursday night.
Let me ask you something about the kind of identity politics things. We talked about this a little bit off camera about why is it that people keep saying, it's kind of almost like a coded way of saying this, Barack Obama can't appeal to middle-class white men, but Joe Biden can, and President Clinton can. Can only white men talk to white men? Like, is it possible for someone else to be able to reach that group of voters?
I don't think it's actually that coded. I mean, I think it is a sort of explicit identity politics point, right? Which is that it's not a question of sort of racial animus exactly.
Right.
It's just the fact that people tend to relate to people who both look like them and talk like them and seem like them and so on. But I think, as I said to you before, I don't think it's sort of purely a racial issue in the sense that, you know, Bill Clinton, nobody's saying, oh, we need to get Jerry Brown out here, right, to relate to working class white men. Bill Clinton, in his political career as a Southern governor, a populist and so on, has always had a particular talent, at least theoretically, for reaching out to what he famously called the Bubba vote, right? And so the contrast, for instance, with Mitt Romney is instructive. I think many people think that Barack Obama, his skin color notwithstanding, can relate better to at least some middle-class white Americans than Mitt Romney sometimes can, even though obviously he struggled with a certain segment of blue-collar white.
Do you think that there's like the elbow-rubbing issue here, which is that, working-class white men may be in closer contact and in closer competition for the same kinds of jobs, and there's maybe some of that involved.
Some of that, although I think you have to remember that Obama there are multiple personas at work, so it's not just the African American male thing, it's also the sort of professorial, academic, liberal. So it's not so much that he reminds working class voters of people they're in competition with. It's that he seems like someone they have less in common with across many different fronts than they might with somebody who grew up poor in Arkansas. Okay.
So that's all for now. I'm going to keep working on Ross off the camera so we can get him over to the dark side. We'll all be back.
Racial code there, Charles?
We'll all be back this evening with the second night of the convention, including marquee